asked himself, to be or not to be? That is the question. Now, we must ask ourselves, do we live and speak all the languages of South Africa? Ladies and gentlemen, Dumelang, Goeiemorgen, Sanbonani, Molweni, Thobela, Lochani, Abusheni, and finally, good morning to all our viewers. Welcome to the 2021 Language Awareness Week. Before we begin, I would like to share some housekeeping tips. On your right-hand side of the screen, you will see a small white button. If you click on this, you will see the chat and Q&A function. We would like to engage with you and see your comments in the chat. If you have a specific question, place it in the Q&A section. This is really great because you as the audience can upvote more pertinent questions, so the popular questions are moved to the top of the screen. To enjoy optimal viewing during the presentation, you can click on the small box in the top right-hand corner. This will expand the presentations if you would like to view them more clearly. To get seated at a table, just double-click on any of the open seats. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the Language Awareness Week, where language is celebrated. Next follows a word from Professor Robert Balfour.
Goeiedag, good day, Sanibonani Dumela, and welcome to Language Awareness Week 2021. It's really a huge pleasure to be asked to provide the introductory comments for this special event at the university, and we hope our staff and our students of the NWU will really benefit from a series of very reflexive engagements and careful discussions about the role of language in our society, particularly given our historical past. I wanted to focus in this opportunity with you on the relationship between language and higher education transformation. It's well known that the definitions of transformation are many and perhaps in some contexts not very well understood. A very limited understanding of transformation can refer to, for example, demographic changes, in a way that we attempt to institute these to achieve equality and to address past inequalities in our education system. But that understanding of transformation is very little, a very small understanding and not very generative. It doesn't take forward really exciting discussions about the role and nature of culture, and particularly language in achieving the transformation of our higher education system in general and our own institution in particular. So when it comes to talking about language and transformation, we should distinguish between the transformation of higher education, in other words, transforming structures and processes and perhaps even demographic targets and the like, and transformation in education. In other words, where we look particularly at power relations, at culture, at ways of doing and being in which there are histories of exclusion and marginalization entailed. This transformation in education, then, is to my mind really what we are undertaking throughout our awareness weeks, whether these focus on gender or race or language, and we've had 2 of those awareness weeks in the course of this year at NWU. So how we look at institutional culture, patriarchy, racism, sexism, and the like is an intersection with language in every case. And we see that come to the fore in many of the language policies of South African institutions which focus on this need for redress in terms of how language is used. But it's not a simple or straightforward matter, because language is only one part of the transformation of an institution. The other components, if you like, that we could focus on include the race component, the class component, gender, as I mentioned, disability, and even geography, your proximity to a metropolitan center like Gauteng, or your remoteness might be a form of disadvantage. And that came to the fore, especially in relation to the COVID experience, where many of our students were, for example, in very remote locations, far from good connectivity, and therefore at a disadvantage within the teaching, learning, and curricular activities associated with our work last year. The other aspects of transformation are, however, much more tangible to us. Teaching and learning, curriculum and programs, the research that we do, our social engagement with communities, even our leadership style and management and governance, our whole institutional structure intersects with language and the importance of language in our environment. It's on that note that I think it's really important that we celebrate multilingualism. The NWU is a multilingual institution, not because we've chosen it to be so in terms of our policy, that is one aspect of it, but in fact our students bring dozens of languages to the university, and those languages are ways of opening up access. They're ways of opening up corridors to knowledge, and they are thus really important to student success. We have a history that we must acknowledge in which two languages have been particularly privileged, English and Afrikaans, and that is by virtue of the colonial and apartheid past. But nothing prevents us as young people, as academics and support staff as well, from opening up the use of our languages for teaching, learning, and success. And all our efforts in terms of, for example, addressing the new policy for languages in higher education, the framework that has just come out, all of our efforts are geared to this idea of making language not a barrier to success, but language as a means to success and linked very carefully to transformation. This is not something we've invented, of course. Our constitution in South Africa speaks very powerfully in section 29 of the rights that people have to languages in education particularly. And then we have a policy in higher education, the languages policy of 2002, that also speaks to the nature of the link between transformation and accessing languages. If we look at the last 20 years in South Africa, we have to say that higher education and universities in particular have had a bit of a patchy past in achieving success in relation to the inclusion of our languages for teaching and learning and for research. But this is not to make us despondent. It's not to kind of pour water over the good efforts that have been made in many of our institutions, not least of which are universities like this one, NWU, or indeed UKZN, and perhaps more recently other institutions as well, for example, the University of Pretoria. How do we achieve this link between transformation of culture and the use of our languages? One of the ways we do so is by welcoming the languages that our students and our staff bring to our classroom environments. And this can be done through the use of multilingual pedagogies in which students assist each other with understanding key concepts and terminology in English through the languages that they bring other than English into their classroom. Another way of doing it is perhaps more formal. We provide particular support for developing terminology in Setswana and Sesotho and English and Afrikaans as a way of supporting the understanding of our students towards their journey to academic success. Either way, though, these efforts, both the formal efforts as well as the making use of the resources that we bring to the classroom, are really important for us as an institution. And I think what emerges from that brief overview in terms of the transformation environment, the link to culture, the link to language, is precisely that we realize that language is an educational tool. Language is the way in which we not only celebrate who we are, but we celebrate who we are becoming. And we transition on those corridors every day, those linguistic corridors every day, transition from the languages that we use to the languages that we are learning. And we are always learning languages as we develop as academics because of the very nature of the disciplines in which we are involved. The university offers a number of services to support this. We all know very well the services that are offered through, for example, the interpreting structures of the institution. But then there are also those other services which you may have seen come to life in 2020 and 2021 in terms of voice-overing of PowerPoints, subtitling of lectures, all sorts of interesting and innovative ways in which we provide access to more than one language to our students through the resources that we have. We saw that in 2015, 2018, when we conducted the survey of languages in use at the university, that there were many languages evident at the institution, not least of which, of course, are English and Afrikaans. But interestingly, what we see if we look at the data between 2014 and 2018 is that the numbers of speakers in particular languages have grown or decreased. So while we have as many as 10 languages represented at the university, these are not static, and they really depend on the numbers of students and the numbers of staff that speak them. Afrikaans, for example, might be a language that's very much in use at the Potchefstroom campus, but it's very, very much in use for a particular reason, in the same way that English is very much in use in Mahikeng or at Vanderbijl Park campus. The point of this example is not to suggest that campuses are linked to languages. I think that's not really useful, especially from an educational environment in which we want to achieve an aligned curriculum and experience for our students and our staff. Instead, what is important is that the very diversity of our settings is a resource. It's a resource we should aim to support. It's a resource that we certainly would like to welcome, and it's a resource that exists in diversity in as much as 10 languages are represented. Some are more, if you like, dominant than others, but this is not to suggest that they are more or less important than others. Many people sometimes ask why it is that we focus on 4 languages in terms of development rather than all of South Africa's 12 official languages. And the answer is simple. We can see from an analysis of our student enrollments across the 3 campuses that Setswana is spoken by more than 8,000 of our students on that campus. English and Afrikaans by less than 1,000 students. If we look at the Potchefstroom enrollments of students between 2014 and 2018, we see that Afrikaans is spoken by over 14,000 of our students, English by under 2,000 of our students, and Setswana by less than 2,000 of our students. And then at Vanderbijl Park campus, we can see that Sesotho is spoken by over 2,000 of our students, isiZulu, interestingly enough, by over 1,000 of our students, and then there are languages such as English, which are spoken by just under 1,000 of our students. Even these statistics are revealing because not everybody speaks just one language. In fact, in South Africa, most of our students and a good many of our academics are already multilingual. In other words, they have between them in every environment up to 2 or 3 or even more languages. And so the questions that we have to ask ourselves and also try and answer as an institution is how do we integrate and include the languages that our students and our academics use in a way that enables them, in a way that enables us as a learning community to use languages as a vehicle for success and a teaching learning resource. And in particular, how do we focus on the integration of African languages, Sesotho and Setswana, particularly for Northwest University? How do we focus on the development of those languages for teaching and learning in a way that develops parity and esteem when compared to English and Afrikaans? So our emphasis must always be, as an educational institution, on inclusion with a view to enabling access, number 1, and inclusion with a view to enabling success, number 2. And that is what must motivate the educational approach for our language policy, because it is through those approaches that we transform the culture of the spaces, we transform the nature of the teaching learning experience, and we transform ourselves to more fully multilingual human beings. I do want to thank especially in this week the organizational team that has put together the week's activities, Prof. Morena Reineke from the Faculty of Education, together with colleagues from the faculties of humanities and our other faculties, which have put together a really exciting program that explores our language diversity, puts the very difficult questions about language hegemony on the table in relation to our language histories. And by doing this, we do not choose as an institution to marginalize those discussions, but rather to bring them to the center of our focus in terms of teaching and learning, because languages are who we are, and languages are also the key to our ongoing development as people. And on that note, I really would like to wish you well for the days to come and to encourage you to participate fully in this program and to enjoy it as much as possible. Thank you very much.
We would really like to thank Professor Robert Balfour for sharing the invitation or the welcoming, with us, for his kind words and kicking off our Language Awareness Week. Thank you so much for logging on this morning. We trust that the week will really, be a highlight on the calendar in September for all of us, where we wish to raise awareness of the different languages that our students and staff bring to the teaching and learning space at our university, across our campuses, but also in our distance education. So because this week is all about celebrating our different languages and our multilingualism, our theme for the week is language as a right, language as a resource, but also language as a responsibility. And we invited our students and staff to contribute to celebrating our different languages. So they submitted videos or audio recordings of their celebrations of their mother tongue, and we put together a package for you this morning as an appetizer. But if you click on the bottom of the screen, if you click on the Language Awareness Week logo, there will be different pop-ups where you can go and watch more video recordings, and these will be available each and every day then, where you can go and watch the video. So let's see what this morning celebratory video is all about. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Ke dumedise yo buang fa ke le so motlhankane ke namana thole ke ja mo gope ke o lala ke motho mo go wa loshua ga go gomela ke mina tshipi fa o le tla le me fa go ga ke bina tholo thole thupana theking e go gutla lengole tlole go bona le tlole go godimo gompieno ke bua ka sabe sa puo ya Setswana ka kakaretso. Puo ke sediriswa se se botlhokwa thata se re se dirisang go ka tlhaeletsana ke motheo o mogolo thata mo botshelong jwa me ka gore ke kgona go itlhalosa botoka thata. Ditso tsa Batswana tse di farologaneng di dirisa puo thata go ka tlhaeletsana jaaka merafe. Puo ya Setswana e nkgontsha go ka tlhaloganya gore ke mang ke tswa kae. Bontsi jwa nako re tshwanetse go itse gore re bo mang ebile re tswa kae re ya kae. Ka puo ya Setswana ke kgona go tlhagisa dikakanyo tsa me bonolo fa ke tlhaeletsana le baithuti ba bangwe. Bontsi jwa nako re dirisa puo go ka boka dikgosi tse di farologaneng tsa Batswana ga mmogo le ditso tsa bona tsa Setswana. Bakwadi ba le bantsi ba Setswana ba kwala dibuka tse di farologaneng go ka bontsha jaaka puo le botlhokwa thata. Dithuto tse di farologaneng kwa dikolong di ikaegile ka Setswana, mme go nna botlhofo thata go ka kgona go tsweletsa dithuto tsa rona. Re le batho re tshwanetse go tswelela go godisa puo le go rata puo ya rona. Molela phofu wa ga bo ga tshabe go swa lentswe. A go tsweleleng go rata puo ya rona le go e godisa. Ke a leboga.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the My Language Portrait Experience session presented by Professor Susan Kutse van Roy, and then also myself, Lorena Lan. I think, Susan, we can perhaps say at the upfront that, we've already completed 30 minutes this morning. So the remainder of our session is merely, getting your toes wet when it comes to multilingualism, I think, and also perhaps better reflecting, understanding your language repertoire. The languages that you as the participants use on a daily basis, the languages you use to speak to your family, your friends, your colleagues. So it's more a self-reflective journey at the moment. So we will take you through a few slides, and we'll also have a demonstration to assist you in completing these language portraits. And then our afternoon session, will be focused on reflecting on the language portraits we've created. And also those of you who were kind enough to share with us your language profiles beforehand. Susan, while you have your coffee, do you perhaps want to share something? You're all the way from the Netherlands today.
I am working from the Netherlands today, and it's wonderful to be with all of us all over the world. Actually, if we think Potch, Making, Van der Bijl, and where Jackie and those colleagues from Millennium are in Joburg, Pretoria area. Lulu, you've highlighted exactly what I want to highlight. Language Awareness Week kicking off, as Robert has said, with us thinking about the languages we bring to our workplace, to our classes, to our learning and teaching experiences. So I'm so thankful that Marina thought that we could start this week by reflecting on the portraits, because I LaRue, you and I are passionate about the portraits as instruments, and that is something, as you exactly said, we will share with colleagues now. So the main aim now is for us, as LaRue said, to put you in the context of multilingualism in the world at Northwest, and then to talk through the idea of creating a language portrait. So we hope that you have your creative juices with you and your crayons somewhere, or your electronic paint box, as LaRue will demonstrate. We can't wait to see your portraits.
Good, thank you, Susan. And colleagues, I think you see, Susan and I, we're enjoying our coffee, so we are quite relaxed people. We tend to keep it informal. So please, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, you'll see there's the general chat and there's the Q&A, and Susan and I will, take turns in checking up there and trying to answer your questions as best we can. So colleagues, as we said, this is the My Language Portrait session, and it aims to be a practical session that helps you to reflect on the languages that you know, use and understand on a daily basis. So if I take you through the quick summary that you can just orientate yourself within, the next couple of hours. So session 1 is what we are busy with now, and we anticipate it to be, roughly about an hour, we say. And then we look at what multilingualism is. We look at the global context as well as the South African context. Then we take you through the practical session of what is a language portrait and also how to complete it under item 4. So you'll see that round about here in item 4, we will again go back to the table modes. And then you will, using your devices, your laptops or your desktops, be able to complete your language portraits. And Susan and I will take you through that process. We'll also jump between table to table, make sure that if you have any questions, we assist you to get them out of the way, get them cleared. And then we will come back for a conclusion, and then it's lunch. So then you go on lunch, and then we come back in the afternoon session. You'll see there's session 2, the reflection of your language profile. Susan will take you on the language board profile. So I will take you on a wonderful journey through your profiles in looking at the type of languages used within this group. Then Susan will take you through the reflective exercises, assessing you to reflect on the languages you've placed in your portrait, the colors and the memories you associated. And then under 3 and 4, we take a bit of a governance angle. And then we look at how does the Northwest University now deal with matters of multilingualism, both within teaching and learning, which Susan will cover, and then in the student life domain, which I will cover. I think thereafter, Susan, we will have been well reflected and identified ourselves. Good. So, colleagues, if we then dive in, and this is a very, very basic diagram, and I want you to make this diagram personal for yourself. So, place yourself within this little purple, bluish purple spheres, and you'll see we identify 3 spheres there. There's the sets of the languages for your family, the sets of languages for education, and the sets of languages for world and work. And what we imply by that, colleagues, is that if you think about your nuclear family, so your brothers and sisters and your parents, perhaps, or if you are the parents, you and your children, we each have a very specific language that we use within that setting. It might be predominantly the home language, which you identify with. It might be additional languages that you use. But if you think about your family gatherings or Christmases or any other type of family gathering that you might have, even just yesterday night in front of the television, the type of language sets you use within that environment does differ from that which you use outside the environment. And I think, Susan, we can even take it further to say that within your family itself, the type of language you use with your immediate family and that you perhaps use with your grandparents or your aunts and uncles, that can even, that can also differ to a certain extent.
Definitely. I speak very carefully to my grandmother. Both of them I spoke very carefully to my one grandmother because she was a language person. And my mixing of languages did not really fly well with Gogo. Who was a very staunch Afrikaans woman. So you're quite right. Generations definitely influence how we speak in families. And now I'm that older Tannie in my family. So how I speak to the younger generation, they often laugh at words I use. And I learn a lot from them. You're right, Leroux.
Yeah, and I think, Susan, that's even indicative of how languages develop over time. You know, as you know, said, the older generation, perhaps we often find the students say it's a more deeper language.
Yes.
I think a more accurate description is more purer language, or it tends to go to the original if there is an original to be had. So it's that whole thing about, colleagues, the languages that you might use within your family differs. And we want you to think about that, because that will influence your portrait coming later on.
Yes.
But then if you place it within the larger context, so your second sphere now, this is your set of languages for education. Think about your primary school, your high school, and your tertiary education. So when you went to university or college or so, the type of language you use there differs from perhaps your familiar language, the languages used in your family setting. So, you know, though the language may transcend, so it's perhaps if you spoke English, the English remained. The variations that you use differ within the class setting. So, and I think, Susan, that then comes to the learning languages, where it's within the classroom setting, you know, perhaps more subject-specific terminology that you and your peers and your lecturers understand. But even if you take it then in the social setting, your peers if you're in a social space or perhaps in a bar or next to a sporting field, that language set can also differ to that, because you're not going to speak about geometry necessarily next to the sporting field, I think.
Yes, you're quite right. So I like your dragging in of concepts like jargon, subject-specific jargon, yes. And then this difference between formal and informal. And you and I speak about languages, but we've also had participants who then go into things like dialects, who go into things like varieties of languages. So when Leroux and I speak about languages here, we actually mean any linguistic expression that you use to make meaning in your life, as he now said, in the education sphere, in the family sphere.
Yes, so Susan, and that signals to the slang almost, that you find different generations perhaps have different type of slang. And I think at the Northwest University specifically, if you look across our 3 campuses, each student grouping has a different type of slang that they use. You know, it is perhaps proper English words, but the combinations thereof are a bit, you know, it's a bit of a departure from the traditional grammatical rules. But still, that is the language sets that they then use.
Yeah.
Then, you know, our last sphere goes to the languages of work, you know, the places of work, the professional settings. So when you now, you know, perhaps as an example, you leave university and you are employed by a professional sector, that type of engagement then also differs. So I think the trend that you perhaps pick up there, or the linear line, is that your language perhaps remains English or Afrikaans or Tswana or German or whatever it may be, but it might vary depending on the set that you use. And within the set, it might mean that you add different languages. So, you know, you might use languages in combination. It's not necessarily a monolingual line we have, but it is that within the social setting, so, you know, at the tertiary level, within your social setting, you might use a variety of 3 or 4 languages because your peers speak those languages. But then in the workplace environment, it might require you to adapt to another language. It might be English, it might be Zulu, it might be Afrikaans, but then your sets change again.
Yes.
Then when you revert back to your familial setting, you know, you tend to then go back to, I think, to your home languages and you know, the languages of culture and cultural identity.
Yes. Definitely. And I like the distinction you're making between the informal and the formal spheres in each of these domains. Because also, if you think about the workplace, one might think I might be Sotho home language speaking, my first additional language might be English, but I also have Setswana family, and there are some Zulu people in my family too, and I've learned a smattering of Afrikaans at school. So one might think that Afrikaans that I don't know well is not an important language. But all of a sudden, when you enter a very diverse workspace, the informal usefulness of languages that you think, I don't know this language so well, but it is part of my repertoire. It's part of the language sets that I bring. That language that you might not know so well might be very useful in a tea room, where you have conversations with diverse groups of people across a new workplace, for example. Mm. So this issue of proficiency levels, Leroux, is also interesting if we think about the languages that we know. We don't know them all at the same level.
Yeah, but that, you know, that they still remain those tools, even in their, you know, those who are less proficient in, you know, yes, that they assist you to perhaps just transcend that barrier or move between those two spaces a bit more effectively. Yes. And I think just inclusively.
Absolutely. If you think about exactly the point of identity and social cohesion and integration that you've made, the point that my Sotho that I learn in the Vaal, I learn informally, and I learn it never with a purpose, or not at this stage, with a purpose to read and to write it. Although I can WhatsApp a bit in Sesotho, but it's basic formulas that my colleagues and my fellow students have taught me. But at least that little Sesotho helps me to show that I'm a girl from the Vaal, where Sotho is a very important language. So that social cohesion, integration element, even with what we call bits of languages that we know. I might not know the full language, and I might not even be able to read and write all of the languages, but I know a bit of that language, and that gives me, as you say, a foot in the door to say, I see you. You are my fellow student, my fellow colleague, and we work together in this space. So yes, bits of languages are important as well.
And I think, Susan, for the participants, when you now move through these stages, remember what Susanna said about the bits of languages, you know, the little snippets that you might know, because they become important, specifically if you want to view yourself in the multilingual setting, where you might realize that your primary or your first and your second languages relate quite closely to your identity or to your culture, to your heritage. But then you see that your third, fourth, fifth languages, and so we go on, and those then they become snippets often. You know, little phrases, little pieces. You can perhaps hear, but you cannot speak. You can perhaps read, yes, but you cannot, you know, speak it yourself. That thing becomes important because it's those. You know, I don't know if we can call them language aspirations that you have, that then also inform your multilinguistic ability, yes, in the end.
I like your term aspiration, because there are languages that we want to learn, that we desire to learn. I sometimes, when I code data from language portraits, I sometimes call them the desired languages. And what is interesting is sometimes they look back to our ancestors or to our heritages, exactly as you have said, Leroux. If my heritage was maybe French and Dutch, it might be that I, as a teenage person, long back, or if I'm a South African who came from the DRC initially, my Chaluba or my Kikongo might be heritage languages which I long for. If I'm a very urban person and I've maybe lost that pure Zulu, and when I go back to my grandparents, etc., and my family for holidays, I might aspire to get back that pure form of the language again, in comparison to my city Zulu, which some students sometimes refer to as my diluted Zulu, which is also an interesting concept that they are using. But you're quite right, to aspire to desire a language. Those are also ones one can put in your portrait to say, I don't know this, but this is something I'd like to invest in future.
Yes. So colleagues, participants, you know, language ambassadors, as Susanne and I phrased it.
Yeah.
Remember this, that if you move through your day-to-day life, and when you reflect now later on, remember that you inherently have sets of languages that you use. And those sets can include different types of languages. It includes the different levels of proficiency that you have within those languages. So once you can speak fully, understand, read, write, once you can only do, a little bit of, and those that you perhaps only have a few phrases in. And then similarly, your languages within these sets can also vary, perhaps the extent to which you use the full capacity of the language can vary, those very formal, proper language metaphors and phrases and words, and then perhaps more the informal slang-related languages. So keep that in mind as we then move through this exercise. And colleagues, if we now look towards multilingualism within the world at an international level, so you'll see that we have two columns. On the left-hand side is then the most spoken native languages, and then you get your non-native languages on the right-hand side. So, I'm not very good at the mathematics, so sometimes I do not read figures accurately. But people tend to think that English is, the utmost spoken language, perhaps, when it comes to the native nature thereof. But if you look at, this is statistics from 2018, which we gathered, is that Mandarin and Spanish remain the preceding languages or the predominant languages above English. And unfortunately, none of our languages, or the 10 remaining South African languages reflect here. But you'll see, go through the list, you find Portuguese at number 7. The African continent, there's a lot of Portuguese also spoken, Russian, perhaps due to the size of the Russian Empire. And then, if you go to the Middle Eastern countries, there you get your Arabic, your Western Punjabi, and your Hindu Urdu.
Yeah.
So the native languages differ from what we necessarily perceive within the more global context, because we seem to believe that because our media and our entertainment is largely English, then everyone's native language will eventually devolve to that. But the trend is it is not that is the case.
No, you're quite right. If you look on the right-hand side, Leroux, that column that says native and non-native languages combined. In other words, the moment we add English second, third, fourth language speakers to the native speaker group, then all of a sudden English is a really important linking language. But Mandarin remains important. Hindi and Urdu then, very important second languages across the vast India as a continent there or as a country. Look at Arabic remaining there, French then moving into the first 10. It's not one of the biggest native languages anymore, but it's a very important additional language. And again, if we think Africa, French is a really important language in Africa. So I think the point you make so well here is languages. We had this anxiety in the 90s. We talked about the McDonaldization of the world. We were really worried that, the spread of English, the spread of American English, maybe more specifically, might limit the use of indigenous languages across the world. Now, there is an effect on indigenous languages, but to our surprise, the more globalization happened, and I think COVID might have another effect now, which we'll have a whole other session on maybe, but when pre-COVID, when globalization really happened and more people traveled easier, cheaper, more of the time, it brought more people into contact more of the time. And on the one hand, it raised the importance of an additional language like English, which we also call the ELF language. English is a lingua franca. But in other words, English spoken by people who do not use it as a native language. A very useful crossing the border language, like Swahili also is in Africa. But on the other hand, it not only raised the importance of linking languages, it also made people more aware of the preciousness of their indigenous languages. So these two things, as you say, happened at the same time. That we realized the usefulness of linking languages, but that we also were again reminded of the beauty and the importance of our indigenous languages. So at this stage, there is an ethnologue that documents endangered languages, and there are languages on that list. But what we're seeing in South Africa is that this multilingual constitution, as you have said, these sets of multilingual languages in the repertoire of individuals, that seems to be holding at this case or at this stage.
Yes, and so what's to me at least important is your statement that, you know, on the right hand side they are linking languages.
Yeah.
So they are not necessarily languages with which you closely relate or associate or find your identity.
Yes.
But they are the languages you require to perhaps move between two different settings, perhaps in the professional sphere, perhaps in the educational sphere.
Exactly.
So it comes back to that nature of it's a tool language, because look at English. The difference between this, the 378.2 million and the 1.12 billion,
Yes.
that's a jump of 700 million speakers. That it's not their identity language.
You're right.
Their work language. So then, you know, it highlights and underscores, underlines rather, that what you said about it is focused on the preciousness of your home, your language, or your native tongue rather, as being that which, you know, is intrinsic to you as a human being, to your identity. So, colleagues, that is the snapshot at a global scale. But if we look a bit closer to home, if we look in our South African context, so unfortunately we do not have our 2021 census data yet, but, you know, we can still work with our 2011 census data.
Yeah.
And we've just circled a number of interesting, you know, figures. If you look at the most spoken language within South Africa, you'll find that it still is Zulu.
Yes.
You know, at a total of 11.5 million speakers within the country. The predominance then lies within the demographic group of Black African. But I think, Susan, what was also interesting to me this morning, if we look in the, you know, the latter, the bottom half, sign language.
Yes.
Has a very large contingent of, I think you can say, speakers under, you know, the Black African group.
Yes.
211, with the closest then being in the colored community of nearly 12,000 people. Afrikaans is the most predominant language under people who identified within the colored category, 3.4 million. Then preceded by, or then followed by, you know, those who identify as white under 2.7.
Yeah.
And then if you go into the rankings, and you know, the next slide will now relate to this one, you'll see that our predominance of languages is first Zulu, then it goes to Xhosa, and then it goes to Afrikaans.
Yeah.
Then only do we arrive at the English language. So, you know, this measures the self-declared home language.
Yes. And Leroux, then there's a group of languages at around 4.5 million. So English is in the company of Sepedi, it's in the company of Setswana. So that's really important to note, that as a home language, English is not a really big language, and our big ones still are, as you say, Zulu and Xhosa. I also, if you look at that line with English, Leroux, and if we look at people who self-identify as Black African part of the population group in the census, these are the questions, as you said, asked by the census. Now, there's also this fear that, you know, we are losing our African languages, but only 1.1 million South Africans who identify as Black African declared English as a home language. So it's not, if you compare that 1.1 with the 12 million of Zulu, it is still a really small group of people that say English is now my home language.
Yeah, and Susan, this then links to the notion that we might perceive that English now becomes predominant, but, you know, I don't know if we can make this conclusion, but we can perhaps just whisper it, that it's because the English might then be the work language, the linking language.
The linking language, yes. As an additional language, it is a really important part of the mix. Look, Leroux, one comment on endangered languages that Anna Doimert and Raj Mestri always remind us is languages have died in South Africa. So we have lost the San and the Khoi languages. There are, every now and again, there's the last speaker of a particular Khoi language, so we must be very respectful of the fact that, yes, we can lose languages, that we have lost languages, indigenous languages in South Africa. We've also lost all the Indian languages that came with the, with that part of colonization. So Indian South Africans have transferred to English as a home language en masse. So there are fewer Hindi speakers, fewer Punjabi, Gujarat, Tamil speakers still using those languages. So although I completely agree with you, I think the moment we see multilingualism, as you and I are seeing it, we're not necessarily seeing a threat to the indigenous languages like Afrikaans, like Zulu, like Sepedi, etc. We are seeing a coexistence in a matrix of languages used for different functions.
And I think, Susan, if you link, that matrix you referred to with our next slide. So I think, colleagues, let's keep in mind but in 2011 we measured Zulu being the most spoken home language, the Xhosa, then Afrikaans, then is in Ndebele. This graph is then a bit more recent data, so it's a 2018 data. So if you look at your light blue lines, it is the languages spoken in the home. So, we associate that to home language, identity language, culture language, the language that you feel is the core to you. And then the outside language is then, we can assimilate that to your work environment, your education environment, perhaps. And then look at the consistency. We still have isiZulu, 25%, Xhosa's there, 40% in the home, Afrikaans, then we come to English, but you see it's shifted now slightly. I'm pointing now, but it's shifted slightly. Your Sepedi has now come up, and your Setswana then, so that also now comes into the feature.
Yeah.
But look at the difference in the jump, colleagues, now with the linking languages Susan referred to earlier.
Yeah.
English now being 16.6%. Jumping from an 8, so it's nearly doubled. It's more than double, actually. 816 years, so it's more than doubled. Zulu remained quite strong. And I think that is due to also the large number of speakers.
Yes.
And also influencing that working environment. And then you'll see Afrikaans has dropped back slightly.
Yes.
But interesting, it's only marginal, but I think it's also a positive growth that's showing under Setswana.
Yes.
That's also now increasing. Only about 0.3, but this is a snapshot, so it might look completely different if we take this again.
So the point you make is so important. So these linking languages are used outside the home. And then we see the important ones. We see Zulu, we see English, and we see the Setswana, if I highlight those 3 bars where you've indicated. But also see how steady the inside home languages remain. So that's a very interesting, and it's a very recent measure, yes.
Yes, so colleagues, if I think, Susan, if we reflect once more backwards, you'll see here on your left side, your right side column, your Sepedi and your Setsonga.
Yeah.
4.6 and 2.27.
Yeah.
And there it's Setsonga and Sepedi. It remained, that trend remains consistent. So it's not that we have a rapid diminishment necessarily.
No, you're right. Of use inside the home.
In the home, it remains the same.
So the challenge, LaRue, then policy-wise, is what Robert has started with, is to develop indigenous languages also then as languages used for science in higher education. So that is the challenge. So we are basically saying these numbers are showing us these languages are well used as languages of cultural identity in the home. But the moment we exit the home, and that means also enter higher education, enter the high school, enter the workplace, then our indigenous languages are not developing further enough. I think that's the picture.
Yeah, in that outside space, we are developing, that obligation that vests there.
Yes, yes.
Good. So, colleagues, let's perhaps check. Susan, I do not think we have any specific.
No, we don't have
that come
questions
to
at
us.
this stage.
So we continue moving forward. So colleagues, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, you pop it in there and we
The
take
Q&A, please.
But colleagues, now we come, we've now given you sort of the building blocks. We've hoped that we've, sparked a few ideas or a few memories or a few initial, self-reflection. And we now come to the point about what is the language portrait itself. So, this thing comes also from one of Susan's previous research. This was a publication, Susan, in cognitive linguistics that you made.
That's right. Yeah.
Recently.
In 2020. Yeah.
So, colleagues, I'm not going to read through the entire thing, but the purpose of a language portrait is in short, you identify the languages you know well, the languages you can use, the languages you aspire to learn, the languages you use in your workplace or in your home setting. You link that to a specific color. And then you place the color on a silhouette that we provide you with. And then, you justify that or you motivate that. So it's a very, very simple activity that you do. You'll see here in our bottom bullet, we highlighted it in a dark purple, that it's an instrument that facilitates your reflection on your language repertoires of multilingual people. So what does that mean, in a very simple manner? It's a way in which you, as a person who knows multiple languages, can think about the languages you use. You can perhaps identify relations between the languages. And by sharing that in a communal environment, such as a platform like this, then we start to learn a bit more about each other and the identity and how we perceive one another. And at the social cohesive level, that then becomes important, in we're living and learning within a diverse community such as South Africa and also as the Northwest University. So keeping that in mind, that the language portrait, you have a silhouette, you have your lists of languages, you link it to specific colors, and you decide your own colors. You place this on the silhouette, and then you make the relevant associations, and you'll see how we use that later to reflect. So, Susan, before we go to our video that you made with our colleagues in Germany, do you have anything to add here? Perhaps a word of advice? Your seasoned environment.
No, I think the video will help a lot, LaRue, and maybe after the video we can get questions from people. But exactly what LaRue has said. So what we're going to ask you is to use the portrait as a way to reflect. That's maybe the only comment I want to make is it's difficult sometimes to think about the languages in our minds and how we use them and with whom and how do we feel about those languages. The language portrait is an instrument that was used since the early 1990s by researchers across the world to help people reflect on the languages in their repertoires. So very simple, as LaRue said, think about the languages or the bits of languages that you know and you use. Think about the ones you want to use in future. Which color would you associate with each of them? Which place on the human silhouette will you associate? And then importantly, why? And that's maybe what LaRue and I will ask of you between the closing of this session and the 2:00 session over lunch, for you to really go and reflect, why is my Sesotho green? And why am I putting it in my toes? Why? Because those are the issues that help us reflect.
Perfect. So, Susan, I cannot think of a better introduction, so I think let's go over.
Language is an important part of being human. In some societies, people know one language. In other societies, people sometimes know different languages, which they use for different purposes.
creating a language portrait is nice because they're a really fun, creative, and hands-on way of thinking about language, and they really make us reflect on the kinds of languages we use, why we use them, and what these languages mean to us. And those are things we tend to usually take for granted. Plus, colouring stuff in as an adult is always fun.
When you create a language portrait, you are asked to perform the following steps. Step 1. Think about the language or languages that you know or want to know, and write them down on a piece of paper. Step 2. Pick a colour for each of the languages on your list. Step 3. Draw these languages on the human silhouette using the colours you selected. Step 4. Take another look at the languages you drew in the silhouette, and then write down the name of each of these languages in a separate box on the form. For each language, you're also asked to write down why you picked a specific place on the body and why you picked a specific colour.
During the process of completing the language portrait, many thoughts, ideas, and personal opinions about language were revealed in a way that I did not really think of before.
I found doing the language portrait fun or interesting because for the first time I was actually posed with a question to say, okay, which language best describes me? Which one do I think should be maybe getting should I be coloring in a color that I felt like best describes me?
Now, language portraits are much more than mere exercises, pen and paper or playing with colors and lines and shapes. But these portraits offer a quite unique opportunity for you to reflect and think about how you feel and what you associate to the various languages you use in your everyday life.
To create a language portrait is nice because it allows you as a member of a multilingual speech community to actively participate in a study on multilingualism and to make your personal experience be seen.
I think language portraits are a fun way of reflecting on the languages in your repertoire, and I can't wait to see your portrait. We are back. We are back.
And I see unintentionally, I wore nearly the same outfit I did that day than I'm doing today. But colleagues, we promise it. It's been I think 2 or 3 months since those videos were made, so it's not the same day. We are not.
We wish.
So, colleagues, Susan and I really hope that video. I think it showed you as well, Susan. It shows what you are going to do.
Yes.
It depends on whether or not you own a printer. If you can print it, but we have a plan B on standby, which we will take you through now as well, and we also have a plan C in the pipeline with these language portraits. So I think let's move over to our next slide. There we go. So, colleagues, this is now the part that will now go to you yourselves, and you'll also see when we now move there, you will go back to your tables, and we ask that you please remain with a friend. You'll see there are 6 chairs around the table. Try to be about 5 per table. That allows me and Susan to jump between the tables. And really, you can talk to each other about this, ask questions, even in the chat, we can still see them. And this will be part of you completing the portrait itself.
Yes.
Either you printing the thing or, I'll show you the digital way now. We have modernized. And we are still modernizing as we carry on. So you'll see there, colleagues, options 1, option 2. Option 1 is the printout and the color by hand. And option 2 is the digital completion. So I think some of you were on my mailing list that last night I sent you the materials. If you were not on my mailing list, I think perhaps just, Susan, how will we handle this? Will we send...
I'm going to put your email address. I'm going to put your email address in the chat, and people who don't have the materials can just email you and receive them just after the session.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, even while we're busy, because when we go to table mode, those who have emailed me, I will just send them through to you. They're not very large files. And then
Yes.
colleagues, the plan C that we alluded to, you'll see here at the bottom, the My Language Portrait app, and we say, courageously we say coming soon. But through the years of research that Susan has completed on the portraits, and also then we've started incorporating the portraits as a transformation tool and a social cohesion tool within the student life environment. We are in the process of developing an app. I think it's nearing completion. Susan, there are some snippets of what it will look like, where you will be able to do this whole process on your mobile phone. And you will be able to submit it to a central database, and it will be completely anonymous. So, in Susan, we've developed this, with your guidance in the research part and my bit of knowledge in the co-curricular part, that it can be used in the informal setting, perhaps, in the co-curricular environment, within the student environment, specifically within the staff environment, but then also as a research tool. That if you do research on multilingualism or language profiles or the like, you can incorporate it there as well.
Yes.
So we are very excited about that.
LaRue, this was your brainchild, and COVID has pushed us as well, because we experienced how wonderful this worked in 2020 when we had physical face-to-face presentations on the reception and welcoming program. But LaRue just said, look, there must be a way that we can go online with this so that we can continue to do this irrespective of COVID, irrespective of if we can go face-to-face. So LaRue, beautiful idea and getting it into practice. Well done.
Good. So colleagues, you'll see we will almost go to the breakaway tables. I will just illustrate the process. And I think, Susan, this is an open invite. I know some of you have previously submitted portraits to us. If you would again want to do so, you are more than welcome to submit it. But if you just want to keep it for yourself, and remember to bring it along this afternoon.
Yes.
Because that is important. We will not show it necessarily this afternoon. We have additional portraits that we will show, that Susan will show.
Yeah.
But bring your portrait with, that you can move through the exercise and the reflection as Susan takes you through it. I think that is very important.
That's very important, yeah. Exactly, LaRue. Good reminder. Bring along your portrait. And if you don't get the materials now, draw the outline of a human person on a piece of paper and do it freehand if you want. But you see LaRue's email there. We will mail you the materials.
So, colleagues, if we can illustrate what we have also seen to you, this is what it is. So basic. So you can draw this even, yourselves. And this is the language portrait or the silhouette that you use. And then together with the language portrait and the silhouette, you'll see there is also an attachment. This is the reflective part.
Yeah.
So you will upload your image here. If you click it here, I would just advise that you have to save your image. I'll not take you through all my many files, but there is a browsing option. So I would just advise, make your life easy. If you completed your image, save it on your desktop. So easy to get there. Then you browse it here, you upload it here, you say, okay, and you'll see the image has imported there. And this is an interactive form. So you can type in there and, give all your reasons, and so you carry on. So Susan, I think what's important here is we'll go through the drawing component now.
Yes.
Is that you must identify your language. You must give it a space. You must give it a color. And then 2 reasons. The reason for the place on the figure. So why did you choose, for example, now the head? And then the reason for the color. Yes. Why did you pick that specific color? And this is up to you. So you identify that, and whether you link it with a memory or with an experience, each person has their own journey in how they link and relate these languages.
Yes.
And you really do not have to type pages and pages and pages. It can be 1 or 2 or 3 sentences that just brings across your message. Now, colleagues, the slight modernization we have undergone to make it a bit easier for today, as I said, you can print this out and use your highlighters and your pencils and that type of thing. But also, you're all, I'm assuming, joining via some form of a desktop or a laptop or a tablet of sorts. So the easiest option we found is that you take this JPEG image that we sent you and you open it in Paint. Yes, you open it in Paint. And it is a very basic program. And I think people think, why do we use it in Paint? But Paint works quite well for this type of environment. You see, the modern Paint is better than the one we had years ago. You can change things now, but I don't want to do that. But then it allows you to, I think conveniently, we should say, color in your space.
Yes.
So you see what I'm doing. Colleagues, this is so easy. I mean, I think you all have played with this on a very long Friday afternoon when time just does not want to run out. So you can do it again. And I mean, you see what I'm doing, colleagues. It's really so easy. And you can, Susan, I think people can even go as far. Let's take another color. I want a color that will show. Let's take this maroon color. You can even draw.
Yes.
I don't have a pencil. I only have a little HP mouse, but you can draw.
Yes, yes.
And I think important to note, it's not necessary to fill every single space. Not at all.
Yeah.
If you just do the feet and the hands and the head, and that is your portrait, that is your portrait.
Yes.
But if you want to go all out and you color the whole thing and you draw backgrounds and
yes.
Add stickers, I don't know how you add stickers in this thing, but I'm sure one can figure it out. Do that.
Exactly.
And then the very easy thing is then you must only save it. And now you ask me, how do you save it? But I'm sure we will figure, let's close it. And then they say, can you save it? And then you save it.
Oh, lovely.
I did not travel that far yet. So then you save it. And this image that you've completed, you then upload here. And then that is your language portrait. Now, I think save it as your language portrait, print it out, put it on your fridge, show it to your friends and family and colleagues, and bring it along to our afternoon session when we arrive at that point. Susanne?
You have done it perfectly. That's exactly what we want people to do, to please reflect with us. As Marina has said in the chat function, let's now create those portraits. So what Leroux is suggesting is that we will go into breakaway mode now. And that will mean that he and I will just jump to 2 or 3 tables. And if you have questions or you are thinking about something and you want to ask, you are so welcome. But Leroux, are we saying we will convene in 10 minutes time? It's 11:35 now, or will we do it at 11:50? Just for a concluding sentence or two. Maybe if we can convene at 11:50, because what I'm thinking, Leroux, if we can just ensure now that everybody understands the task, then they can quietly sit and do their portraits in their own space, own time, and just bring them along at 2 o'clock. So I think we need about 10 minutes to just make sure at the tables that everybody is fine. And so if we convene at 11:50 for last questions, if people have, then we can conclude session 1. Is that okay?
No, I think that will work well. And I think colleagues, those who do not have the materials yet, please, just pop me a short email. I'm opening the emails now to just send to those who do not have. And then, Susanne, I think let's just hop around. And then we come back to the stage, as it were, at 11.
Leroux, there was one question that I handled in the chat. It was somebody saying, do we think that 2011 census data will remain the same? In other words, asking us about the stability of this. Will, Afrikaans shrink, Sotho shrink, Zulu shrink? And I've answered it by just saying that I've done a project in the Vaal with first-year students on our campus in 2010, 2015, and 2020, where I've asked 5 years apart exactly the same set of questions to first years in our context in the Vaal. And statistically significantly, 0 difference between the 3 test periods. In other words, the number of languages that students say they have in their repertoires remained exactly the same. The functions for the languages remained exactly the same. So based on that piece of empirical data in our context, I can't generalize to South Africa, can't generalize to Potch, to any other place. But that's one piece of study that I've at least done that is showing that the repertoires are remaining stable.
Okay, so Susan, I think then we've come to the end of the first session, at least, not the second session yet.
Yes. Yes. Leroux, I jumped between tables like you did, and the colleagues were fine. They knew what to do. Some of them couldn't, they did exactly what you inspired them. In other words, if I can't print, I draw the outline and I just print those labels for reflection. So on my side, I thought
Yeah, I think also everyone managed, and I sent it to, I think, 4 or 5 people who had not received it by then. So colleagues, if you still don't have it, just pop me or Susanna Mel and we'll send it on. And I think that is about it for the morning session. Colleagues, the afternoon will, I think, involve a little bit more work from your side, because then you'll have to reflect.
yes.
You know, I think that's personal work that you need to do.
Yes, you're right.
But between Susanne and myself, you know, we will take you through that journey, as you know, as we can call it. So if you remember, what is on the menu for this afternoon, it will then be our language profiles. So I think we had a number of you participate and give us your overview of the languages you know, use, and you know what your views are on them. Then there's the language portraits, which you are busy with now, and you know you can complete this through 12 o'clock in your lunch hour. Just bring it with you. And then we will have the 2 governance viewpoints, the one for teaching and learning that Susanne will take, and then the one for student life, which I will take. And then, you know, and then our time together comes to an end.
Absolutely, and we'll hopefully have 4 or 5 of the colleagues who have done portraits in the past to join us right at the end of session 2, Leroux, to sort of share, did this help them? Was this a useful instrument? And then also, if they have views on the policy of the Northwest University, let's hear from colleagues in faculties and in student life and admin. What do they think?
Good. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the 2-hour break. Enjoy your lunch. We see you all again at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Same link, same platform, same presenters.
Thank you, Leroux. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.